So we'll just get right into the presentation. So this is our abortion awareness virtual event that Medical Marvels is hosting on September 4th, 2022 at 12 o'clock p.m.
Okay, so what exactly is abortion? According to the Mayo Clinic, an abortion is a procedure that uses medicine to end a pregnancy and does not require surgery or anesthesia. People get abortions for many reasons, and that includes like unwanted pregnancy or an end to an early miscarriage.
So here's going to be a little bit of background about the history of abortion around the world from 3000 BCE to the 19th century. So evidence of abortions have been taking place that date back all the way to China in 3000 BC using mercury as a forced method of miscarriage. And there have also been evidence found in the ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, Romans, and in the Americas. And abortion was legal in the United States from the 1600s to the 1800s and was highly encouraged by many people during this time. The Catholic Church was also unopposed to abortions as well. However, this view changed in the late 1800s.
A little more into the history. The eugenics movement in the US aimed at maintaining the white race, therefore illegalizing abortion. So the American Medical Association that was founded in 1840 immediately set out outlaw abortions in the US. And people believed that if the abortion was outlawed, then it would keep women from dominating the medical field because caregivers and midwives would be able to perform them back then instead of obtaining a doctor to the procedure. And many of these things we still see in our history today worldwide.
So here's some statistics about who receives an abortion by age in the U.S. So this study this report was done in 2019, and 0.4% of women received an abortion who are less than 15 years old. 15 to 19 years old, it's about 6% of women. 20 to 24 years old of women received an abortion. 19%, sorry. 25 to 29 years women who are aged received an abortion. 18, sorry, I'm butchering this. 18.6% of women who are aged 25 to 29 years old received an abortion. 13% of women aged 30 to 34 years old received an abortion. 7.4% of women aged 35 to 39 years old received an abortion, and 2.7% of women aged more than 40 years old received an abortion. And this study has been done per 1,000 women as well.
Okay, so as we all know that the Roe versus Wade was overturned on June 24, 2022. If you followed with your current events or any news outlet, we would see that many people were talking about abortion and what it means to women and their loved ones. So we're just going to dive in more about everything that's going on.
So here's a slide about the mental health impact on unintended pregnancies. Results showed that based on a study, results showed that the overall effect of an unintended pregnancy on maternal depression and parenting stress was statistically significant. There was a 20 to 22% greater odds of a maternal depression when there is an unintended pregnancy, and there's a greater depression score and a greater parenting stress score as well.
All right. Another thing we want to talk about is this NPR, it's a news outlet article about the Mexican clinics offering abortion services to Americans over the southern border. This is pretty important of a topic to discuss, especially when it comes to abortion. So it summarizes that abortion services in the United States often cost more, ranging from $600 even to $1,000 without insurance. And abortion services offered in Mexico range an estimated $20 to $450, and it depends on how far the person is in their pregnancy, and that's a huge range of a difference. But despite the difficulties in accessing an abortion in Mexico, many people urgently seek this medical care because it can save their life. And we also know that the challenges include the language barrier, finding childcare services, and withdrawing a foreign currency, which is the Mexican peso. And there are bounty hunter laws that incentivize the people to like report other people seeking an abortion. And that becomes very scary of a topic, especially for people who are affected by these abortions. I'm just going to source the link of the article to the chat. So if you want to take a look at it, you're free to do so.
So yeah, so these next few slides are essentially going to be current events in relation to abortion and how they're affecting women across the country. So abortion, based on this NPR article, the abortion ban has affected sexual assault victims. And so because people have traumatic episodes from being sexually assaulted, and reversing the abortion ban only exacerbates those experiences like once more. And back then, people were having an abortion in secret because it was illegal at the time, and people would often find out through word of mouth or through having secret connections to doctors willing to perform the abortion. And multiple states across the United States are implementing complete abortion bans with no exceptions to incest or rape. And in the current state that America is in, many people question the new law enforcement with abortion rights and how they will be impacted by these restrictions.
All right, another news story that we want to talk about is the NPR article on a national news story. I'm pretty sure a lot of us has heard about this. It was like a very big outrage going on, and it involves the 10-year-old child who was forced to travel out of the state to obtain an abortion because she was raped. However, in Ohio, an abortion is banned after 6 weeks of becoming pregnant. So the child was unable to obtain an abortion because she was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant. And many of the conservative politicians were denying the story and became more of a skeptical of the article's validity. And it was something that many people were talking about. In the school, they're talking about it, in the news, and like journalism. And at a young age, it's really difficult because these children are unaware about what's happening with their bodies, especially with instances of rape and sexual assault in the picture. And abortion is like extremely crucial for saving a child's life.
So now there's a WebMD article about abortion pill scams and fake abortion clinics. I'm not sure if everybody's heard of this. It's something new that I've been exposed to, and I just thought it was like really interesting and scary. So women are turning to abortion pills online and are facing health risks through these counterfeits and possibly expired pills through scams and unlicensed sellers. And this can be very dangerous because a lot of these abortion clinics are offering these services, these fake services, and it can really harm a lot of people who are trying to not have a baby. And so Al Carter, who's from PharmD, the executive director of the nonprofit National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, says that 96% of online pharmacies out there are illegitimate. And after the Supreme Court ruling was leaked in May, there was a 162% increase in searches for abortion medications online. So it just goes to show that it's like super scary that people are turning to these fake clinics and online pharmacies that aren't even real, because that's how desperate they were after Roe versus Wade was overturned. Yeah.
Okay, so in the general Planned Parenthood website, sorry, you can see in the homepage that they give you a list of options what to do when you get upon the website, and you're able to book an appointment. And with the Planned Parenthood for a safe abortion, you can do in-clinic abortions with 2 types of like suction abortion and dilation and evacuation. There's also the option of the abortion pill that works up to 11 weeks of pregnancy, and then the abortion can be like conducted in the privacy of one's own home. And they also have an FAQ question section where you can ask any questions and it could be answered with accurate resources, and you can get like help, you can go on call, and that's just like a way for us to introduce the new segment of our event today.
So here are all the sources that we use for today's presentation. I'll send this out in the Google Slides to everybody after the meeting is over. And yeah.
Yeah, and now we're very excited to introduce our Q&A session with Lauren LaMagna from Planned Parenthood Hudson Peconic. And Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren. I use they and she pronouns. I am the public affairs manager at Planned Parenthood Hudson Peconic, which is a Planned Parenthood affiliate that serves 4 counties in New York, including Suffolk County, Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam. I started my Planned Parenthood journey as an advocate about 10 years ago. I started as a volunteer and slowly realized that this is my passion, and now have been working for them full time for about 6 years. So that's me in a very small nutshell. But I'm super excited to be here and answer folks' questions about what is happening in the country. How has the recent Supreme Court decision changed people's experiences? How has it not changed people's experiences? Because people's access to abortion hasn't always been the same. Access to abortion has definitely been impacted by various identities that people hold in their lived experiences. So super excited to get started.
Yeah, so if anybody has a question of anything related to abortion news or anything that you have a concern about, just feel free to ask it, like, unmute yourself or just add it in the chat.
And if it would be helpful, I can provide kind of my own perspectives on the things that you presented about, and maybe that might spark some questions. So great job on giving some like really important factual information. And I think a good place to start is talking about or level setting Roe v. Wade, right? And the ways in which legal access to abortion has shifted over time in the United States, right? So prior to 1973, prior to Roe v. Wade, access to abortion varied depending on where you lived. New York State legalized abortion in 1970, so prior to Roe v. Wade. And like you all had mentioned, for most of history, abortion wasn't really even something that was considered a concern, right? Abortion has always existed throughout history in many, if not all, places across the world. Being able to control one's reproduction, when to have a family, when to have children, that is something that has always existed. And so in 1973, with the formal Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade saying that access to abortion was a constitutional right, that has always been seen as like a monumental Supreme Court decision and something that protected people's rights. I say people because abortion does not only impact women, right? Abortion access anybody who has the ability to get pregnant, regardless of their gender identity, gender expression, right? So we like to say pregnant people able to get pregnant, women and other people able to get pregnant, right? To make sure that we are being inclusive of many people's experiences and recognizing that not just people who identify as women are able to get pregnant. That gets tough when you, particularly as like medical students, as people who are interested in the medical field, medical students, people looking to become medical students, even myself, when we talk about abortion and we're pulling information from data, we have to cite data the way that it is written, right? And so many times in research, anybody with a uterus is kind of automatically categorized as a woman, right? And so when we are citing data, particularly at PPHP, we say, we acknowledge, we'll say the data statistic, and then acknowledge the fact that this number is most likely inclusive of people who don't necessarily identify as women, but may have the ability to become pregnant, right? So that definitely impacts someone's ability to access abortion. And any other sort of healthcare. We see health disparities amongst folks of differing gender identities because people don't necessarily feel comfortable going to the doctor, don't feel safe going to the doctor, right? And so that lack of access to healthcare based on gender identity is something that is kind of amplified in this access to abortion conversation. Outside of that, abortion wasn't always accessible, and it never has been accessible to everybody in the same way, whether it be based off of your how you identify racially, your socioeconomic status, your immigration status, whether or not you have healthcare. If you live in a rural area where access to healthcare can be very, very limited, all of those things impact someone's ability to access healthcare. So while Roe v. Wade was the law of the land, right, and we had the constitutional right to access abortion, a legal right without the actual ability isn't necessarily a right at all. And so the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I think, has created more barriers for people, even though those barriers have already existed and have always been in the way of people getting the access to the care that they need throughout history. But I see that someone posted a question in the chat, so I would love to address that. Hi, my name is Katie. I'm a midwife from England, and I was wondering about the care women receive. In the UK, as midwives, we care for women who have abortions and provide that care. Is it the same in the US? Yes. So in the United States, there are many different categories or classifications of medical professionals who are able to provide abortion care. And that actually differs from state to state. So in New York State, we passed the Reproductive Health Act in 2019. And what that did was bring New York State's law around abortion care in line with Roe v. Wade protections at the time. Because New York State's abortion law was passed in 1970, which was 3 years prior to Roe v. Wade, it was actually outdated. And so if Roe v. Wade were overturned, New York State would have gone back to the 1970 protections, which were not adequate, right? They were not up to par with what Roe v. Wade was protecting. And so in 2019, New York State passed the Reproductive Health Act, which essentially brought our abortion law up to code with Roe v. Wade. It, allows folks to receive an abortion up to 24 weeks. And then after that, if the life of the pregnant person or the health of the pregnant person is at risk, it expanded who was able to provide abortion care to include midwives, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, and not just MDs or doctors. And the reason why that was a major win in terms of access is because in 1970, when New York State's abortion law was originally written, there weren't the same amount of kind of professional classifications, right? There were no nurse practitioners, there were no physician's assistants. Those professions and those skill sets didn't exist. And so how could you write a law that included all of those things if they didn't exist, right? And so New York State updated that. So the medical professionals who are able to safely provide abortion care and it's under their scope of practice are able to do so. And that is a huge win in terms of access for abortion in New York State. And so that's the New York State law. And now with Roe v. Wade overturned and abortion laws going back to the states, we might see different states providing different kind of classifications of who is able to provide abortion, if at all, right? Because we are seeing that in various states, people are being criminalized for providing essential reproductive health care. Great question. Great question. Any other questions that folks might have?
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
So how do you think the repeal of Roe versus Wade will affect training in abortion and reproductive health in medical school? And like, how will it affect people who are aspiring to become doctors in the future?
That's a really good question. And I don't know if the answer that I have is one that you're looking for, but I can tell you things that we have already kind of been aware of the barriers that exist within medical schools, right? Obstetrics and gynecology is not a regularly taught thing in like general medical school, right? Like it is a specialization. And there are definitely gaps within medical school education around people in general. I used to work with within LGBTQ populations, and we would do presentations about, gender expansive people for particular medical schools, because people were like, we don't get this education in medical school on how to treat folks who fall outside of the gender binary, which is a huge gap in providing just general medical care, right? Another thing to name is that we are already seeing a gap in, how do I want to describe this? Okay. If we think about abortion later in pregnancy, right? Something that is very much so needed for people who are actively seeking that care, right? And it can happen for many, many reasons. There are many reasons why somebody might seek an abortion later in pregnancy. This becomes an access issue, because while there might be the legal right to access an abortion later in pregnancy, that type of care requires training and instruction and practice like any other medical profession or medical procedure, right? You have to make sure that you have somebody who can train other providers, right? And make sure that they are competent in that care, right? Because abortion later in pregnancy is actually not very common, it can be difficult to find a provider who can provide abortion later in pregnancy, because there's not enough cases for people to gain that competency on a regular basis, right? It's not like being able to provide, let's throw a random kind of medical thing out there. Being able to draw blood, right? Being able to, for a dentist, pull a tooth, right? All these other things that when you're in medical school, you have to practice. You need a large enough population that needs that service so that all these other, so people can kind of get that training, right? Many people have to get teeth pulled. Many people get blood drawn. Most people, a lot of, when you're going for a physical, a lot of times you'll get your blood drawn, right? So that is a very, very common kind of like medical practice, right? Abortion later in pregnancy is something that's actually not very common when you look at when people have abortions overall. So there's this gap that already exists within abortion care because of the number of people that may or may not need that service. Regardless of how many people need it, I just want to make it very clear that people should be able to access abortion regardless, right? Regardless of that. Period. End of statement. And so something to think about is, if abortion is illegal in certain states and there are medical schools in those states, what kind of gaps is that creating for our future providers, right? How is that going to impact future and current providers? That is something that I think folks don't necessarily, that we've been having a lot of conversations about. Obviously, we need to be centering our patients in these conversations. We need to be centering the folks who actively need abortion care. But something else that has been coming up is like, what about the people who have jobs providing abortions in those states? Now they don't have a job, right? And like, how do we support people who are losing their jobs because they're no longer allowed to provide the care that they need, that people need in those states? What does it mean for those lives, to be able to support their families, right? So it's definitely something that we're going to see the consequences of Roe v. Wade in places that people don't necessarily think about, like medical schools, right? So that's a great question, and I hope that answers it. It's it's really hard because these things are kind of ever changing, right? Abortion policies are changing on a week by week, a day by day basis, and so I don't necessarily think we're going to see the full range of impacts on the various aspects of society in general, until, as you know, it's going to be kind of ever evolving. But that's a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering.
Of course. I see another question in the chat. Do you see Roe v. Wade? Do you see Roe v. Wade go back to how it was, or is it the path? Is it the path women are on now, and it won't be coming back? I'm passionate about women's rights worldwide, and I'm worried we won't return to how it was. Okay, I see what the question was kind of getting at. Do I think that we'll ever get to a place where Roe existed again? I hope so, right? Like, I hope that we'll be able to continue to fight. I will also name that Roe v. Wade and the protections of Roe v. Wade should not be the goal. Roe v. Wade is the floor, right? It should not be the goal because Roe was not adequate for a lot of people. Even with Roe v. Wade protections in place, there were still hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Yeah, definitely millions. I'm trying to like think of the number and how many commas there are. Yeah, millions of people in the United States specifically that were not able to access abortion care, even with Roe v. Wade in place, whether it be the Hyde Amendment, which restricts, federal funding to go, and where federal funding can go in terms of abortion care, which impacts people who have health insurance that comes from the federal government, including folks in the military, Indigenous folks who get their health insurance from federal programs, any other person who gets their health insurance from federal programs. Like, that is a huge barrier because that funding was not allowed to go to abortion care. Like I said earlier, abortion bans most directly impact folks who identify as Black, Indigenous, brown, other folks of color, right? So Roe v. Wade is the floor. Protections of Roe v. Wade are like the bare minimum. We need to do better, right? I think one thing that we are kind of trying to silver lining this, even though we should not be silver lining this, right? Something that we're using to look forward is that, like, okay, Roe v. Wade is no longer the law of the land. And so with this kind of protection broken down, it's a really scary time, and there's going to be a lot of challenges, and we have an opportunity now to fight for something better, right? Fight for something that can be put in place so that we don't have people who are legally allowed to access care, but in practice still can't get the care that they need. So we need to, we all need to fight for something better. And that's kind of the hope that we're holding on to. I know that we're coming up to the time limit. And so I believe someone has one more question. And so I would love to hear that before we wrap up.
Yeah, I just had one quick question that just came up to my head as you were speaking. I was thinking about, I'm obviously a young teen myself, so I don't know much about abortion other than what I hear from the news or on websites or even from like actual educated people. And I was wondering, like, what are the most like common like misconceptions about receiving an abortion, or like what's wrong, like what do people get wrong about abortion?
People think abortion is dangerous. That is the biggest misconception about abortion. Abortion is one of the safest medical procedures. It has less risks than a colonoscopy. So that I think is the biggest misconception, is that abortion is dangerous. Are there ways in which society creates barriers that can make trying to receive an abortion dangerous? Yes. But if all people were able to access abortion, they were all able to get the resources that they needed, the information that they needed, the care that they needed, abortion is one of the safest medical procedures. And that is something that I think is a huge misconception. I think you also bring up a really great point that I want to add, is that the lack of information about abortion is one consequence of comprehensive sex education not being prioritized in this country, right? I think that, comprehensive sex education is something that people don't realize is not required, right? Only 29 states and the District of Columbia, so Washington, D.C., require some sort of sex education. Many of those states, the sex education does not have to be medically accurate. Like there's a lot of problems with how information about our bodies, information about sex, about healthy boundaries, about healthy relationships, about navigating power dynamics when it comes to relationships, not just with intimate partners, but with anybody, with including, how to advocate for yourself when you go to the doctor. Like all of those things are kind of incorporated into comprehensive sex education with so many more things, right? And so the lack of comprehensive sex education is astounding, and I think contributes a lot to misinformation about abortion, misinformation about a lot of different things. And so for me personally, and I think for a lot of people who do sexual and reproductive healthcare advocacy, comprehensive sex education can actually be a very important step in a solution to a lot of health disparities that exist, right? The more people have accurate information about their bodies and about their relationships and the changes that they go through puberty and throughout life in general, I think would help with a lot of this information. And a lot of misinformation is the foundation of uninformed policies, uninformed views around specifically sexual and reproductive health care and abortion, right? And so I'm a huge advocate for comprehensive sex education. I think that's something that we need to also be focusing on, because it is interconnected to a lot of other issues. Sexual violence in our communities, right? Domestic violence in our communities, all that have individual and public health risks. So I can go on about sex education. We can have a different event about sex education specifically. Like I think that I think it'll be great. But to go back to your original question, the misconception that abortion is not safe is the biggest one. Abortion is one of the safest medical procedures. Period.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you. That was like a really good response, because I was just thinking about sex education, especially for LGBTQ youth, especially in New York City schools. I know that we're more like open and inclusive than other states. However, there is still such a big lack of it, and that really impacts the lives of not just teens, but into adulthood. So if we ever do have future events, we would love to have you here again.
Love that.
And I know we're cutting very short on time, so I just want to thank you personally and everyone else who came here to listen. All the questions, the feedback, everything was very helpful and informative, and I hope that you all have like a wonderful and informative time. All
Thank
right,
you for having
guys.
me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Enjoy the
Thank
rest
you,
of the summer.
everyone.
Thank you.